So I had an interesting question from a client yesterday, and that question was, what do I do if I'm introduced incorrectly in a podcast? Now, a little bit of context here. This client and the podcast host knew each other very well. They had worked together in a lot of different ways, so he knew that she was legitimately an expert, and they just kind of ran with it, a little free-flowing, because they had that relationship there. But what you want to do is not address it when it happens. You want to address it before this happens. So you'll find that if you've ever worked with a PR professional or a podcast booker or anything like that, these professionals will arrange these things ahead of time. They'll explain how you want to be introduced. They'll also explain how your name needs to be pronounced. And if you're doing your own PR, if you're doing your own podcast booking, this is something you need to do. So explain to them exactly how you want to be introduced. What is your title? What is your role at the company? Whatever backstory they're going to use in the introduction. You want to make sure that that's all laid out ahead of time so that there's not any miscommunication, there's not any errors, or there's not any awkward moments where you have to say, well, hold on, that's not my title, I do XYZ, right? So whatever you want them to say should be addressed long before that podcast episode is ever shot. Now, the same applies to your name. So a lot of people will mispronounce names. No malice. It's just, we read things differently sometimes, right? I get this problem a lot. I have an unusual name, at least by English standards. My last name is spelled Knauff. So a lot of times I'll get people saying, Knauff or Knauff or things like this, right? Which is crazy because, we don't have a Knauff or a Knie. So we know that it's pronounced that way, but because I anticipate that people are going to say it incorrectly, I will make an effort to prepare them ahead of time just to make sure that when we do start that podcast off, we're starting off on the right note, right? Because if you go in and let's say something goes wrong, and it's not the end of the world, right? If somebody botches an introduction, it's not that difficult to back up and redo it properly. But now you're kind of starting the podcast off on this weird energy because things were not right, things are a little bit awkward, and that could carry through for a little bit. So you want to try and make everything as smooth and pain-free as possible. Just get all of your ducks in a row, make sure they know exactly how you want to be introduced, and make sure they know how to pronounce your name. That should be done ahead of time. So, you can explain how you want to be introduced in an email or a phone call ahead of time, or whatever communication channels you're having with this podcast host or the producer ahead of time. But then I would also recommend going ahead and just doing a quick voice memo, especially if you have an unusual name. Shoot a quick voice memo and just shoot it over, showing them exactly how your name is pronounced. That way, everything's going to go smooth. You get that podcast episode started off on the right foot. Everybody's happy, and it's just got this great energy, and you're able to focus on sharing your knowledge and bringing valuable content to their audience. So hope you guys found that helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd go ahead and like this video, drop a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications, all that good jazz. And look forward to the next video, guys. Take care.